You walk in a room, in a city you are visiting for the first time. Suddenly you have the strange sensation you've been here before. Or someone speaks, and as they talk to you, you just know you've heard that same person say the same thing under exactly the same circumstances once before in your life. It's known as déjà vu, the feeling of having heard, said, done, or sensed something previously. Reincarnationists have an easy explanation for it. You have been there before, in another life. To facilitate the knowledge of past lives, occultists, holistic health therapists, and a variety of New Agers have developed hypnotic and meditative techniques to take you into the past. Fran Fawcett, writing in the East-West Journal magazine, described her own experience during a past lives workshop. The teacher directed participants under hypnosis to identify a personal fear and then go back to the cause. Anne was afraid of speaking before a large crowd, so while lying on her back with her eyes closed, she suddenly saw herself as a Buddhist monk standing on the stairs of a public building teaching Buddhist doctrine to Muslims. Suddenly she found herself prostrate on the stairs, mortally wounded by an arrow from a crossbow. Later she learned of the 12th century Muslim conquest of India. Anne is convinced that her fear of audiences stems from this fatal occurrence 8 centuries ago. Belief in reincarnation is becoming commonplace in much of the West, with people seeking ways to go back to what they were. Actor Glenn Ford underwent hypnotic regression and says he was a Christian martyr eaten by lions and later a piano teacher in early 18th century Scotland. Dancing in the Light, Shirley MacLaine contends that a sexual liaison with a Russian filmmaker wasn't an immoral indiscretion. On the contrary, the two had been lovers in previous lives, so why not this one? In the case of MacLaine, her past lives have been confirmed by spirit guides and acupuncture. In Dancing in the Light, she writes, I was lying on this table with needles quivering from my forehead, my shoulders, and my ears, believing that I could get in touch with lives I had lived before so I could clear up some confusions I have in this lifetime. MacLaine goes on to describe how the acupuncture sessions invoke what she calls incarnational pictures, which pass before her mind in a series of images. Among MacLane's past lives were those of a master of weather control in ancient Atlantis, a nun murdered with a hatchet in her forehead, a warrior stabbed in the stomach, a 10-year-old child run over by a horse-drawn cart, and a saffron-robed Buddhist monk. Psychologist Edith Fiora, who practices past lives therapy in Saratoga, California, frequently takes patients to their childhood, as do most therapists. The difference is Fiora may be taking them to a previous childhood. She claims that obesity, frigidity, insomnia, indecisiveness, and even fear of heights can be cured in this fashion. Fiora tells of a realtor suffering from insomnia who in a previous life was a gunslinger, always afraid of surprise attacks. An obese man became so because he once starved to death on a sailing vessel. An executive's career and family life was stunted by fear of heights because of a previous existence as a repairman who fell from a Gothic cathedral. Fiora is convinced that reincarnation is a fact based on her therapeutic approach. She claims that in every case she's investigated, there's a link between a pragmatic event in the past and a problem or phobia in the present. Psychologist Fiora has written a book called You Have Been Here Before, touting the benefits of her reincarnation therapy. After all, the patient who overcame chronic headaches after finding out it was the result of being guillotined in the French Revolution is proof enough for her. Wow, what a headache. But are such sources biblical? Should Christians get involved with relaxation techniques, guided imagery, and hypnotic therapy that seeks to regress beyond the womb? What should you do if a counselor or therapist tells you to count backwards and suddenly you see a tunnel of light leading to a past life? Jeff Munson is the Public Information Officer for the Institute of Parapsychology back in Durham, North Carolina, and he's on the phone with us right now. Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob.
All week long, we've been discussing the subject of parapsychology, various aspects of divinatory and clairvoyant practices. Perhaps it would be well if you would just take a moment and define, from the standpoint of the Institute, parapsychology for people who really haven't latched onto that $18 word yet.
Okay. The Institute of Parapsychology is one of the research organs in parapsychology, the science of parapsychology. We study psi, P-S-I. That's the Greek letter, and it stands for the same as psyche out of psychology. And it's a generic term for ESP and psychokinesis. Now, ESP, of course, is extrasensory perception, and psychokinesis is popularly called mind over matter. ESP includes 3 different phenomena: precognition, telepathy, and clairvoyance.
Now, when we talk about clairvoyance and telepathy, there might be some who would be willing to believe there's something not yet understood in the mind that we can't explain that's there, that communicates. But when we talk about precognition, we're really getting into the realm of fortune-telling. One of the documents released by your organization, A Brief Introduction to Parapsychology, mentions the tendency of orthodox science to ignore or relegate to the possibility of the supernatural, as religion generally does, phenomena of this sort. Isn't precognition a little different? That really is somewhat fortune-telling as compared to the others.
Well, fortune-telling might be one way that you could define that, but the simplest way, and for the scientists, of course, they try to be as simple as they can, you would just call it knowledge of future events.
What about the bioelectric processes that some think are capable of generating high-frequency cerebral waves? We discussed that the other day with a gentleman who's a scientist, and we talked about whether or not the Faraday cage experiments and so on have been effective. Do you people now feel as though there is some bioelectric process involved?
On the contrary, Bob, our feeling is that it's not anything, ESP is not anything like mental radio. The reason is because in the past there have been experiments done using the Faraday cage where subjects who were trying to use their ESP were inside the Faraday cage and the targets that they were trying to know about were outside. And in spite of the fact that the Faraday cage blocked off all possibility of electromagnetic radiation, the experiments were still successful.
What about the idea of cytrons, this little cloud of imaginary mass and particles? I mean, do people with ESP, some believe, have a little cloud of whatever floating around their heads sending out signals?
Well, a lot of people believe a lot of different things, but as scientists, we want to see some evidence. And so far, we haven't had any sort of evidence about cytrons that we trusted enough to put our money on it.
Because we take a Christian biblical worldview of the phenomena that exist in the realm of human experience and the supernatural, one of the questions that concerns me, Mr. Munson, is to what extent we're dealing with religion when we talk about parapsychology. Can you define that for us? Because much of the phenomena that you are investigating has been traditionally defined in terms of shamanistic practices, for example.
Yes. I actually anticipated this question under the circumstances, and so I gave a little bit of thought to it. Historically, as you know, parapsychology emerged out of science that was called psychical research, which focused primarily, although not exclusively, on spiritualistic phenomena, mediumship and contact with spirits that were supposed to have departed. In that sense, there is a natural historical progression from religious concerns, that is, life after death, and the work of parapsychology today. Now, I think that one important concept in religion that has some relevance to parapsychology is the concept of faith. Religions are well known for the importance that they place on faith. Parapsychology is interesting for one reason around faith. It so happens in the experimental literature that people who believe in ESP in general, or that they can do ESP, in tests of ESP do better than people who don't believe.
What about the Frederick Myers theory of the empirical self, saying there exists a more comprehensive consciousness, a profounder faculty, which for the most part remains potential? Are you saying this is that Myers, was he talking about this realm of faith and belief that supposedly would open up the world of psi phenomena?
Well, I think what you're referring to, Bob, about Myers is his subliminal self, which is connected to what modern psychology calls the unconscious. Some people, including psychologists like Carl Jung, for instance, believe that there was connections between religious phenomena or religious beliefs and the material that science looks at. But it's a very that requires far more time for discussion, I think, than we have here. There does seem to be some overlap, though, in my opinion.
Okay, let's just briefly address this collective unconsciousness collective unconscious phenomenon. In traditional theology, what we're really talking about here, Jung may have taken a different direction, but we're really talking about kind of a mystical, Brahmanistic worldview, the monist idea, the all is one, the interrelationship, a kind of pantheism, are we not?
Well, you said a mouthful there, and I think each of those descriptions I would want to discuss separately. But in general, I think your argument is feasible, yes. That's one implication of the collective unconscious.
Should people be fearful, from your perspective, from the Institute of Parapsychology, should they be fearful from this phenomena of this nature? Do you believe there is strictly a natural materialistic universe, or is there a realm of good and evil, of disincarnate entities, angels, demons, whatever, who may be manipulating the consciousness of man through phenomena such as this, such as not only Christian theologians but shamans and so on have maintained for centuries?
You ask me such big questions. I want to make clear that we study extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. Now, the reason psychical research became parapsychology was because Dr. Rhine, the man who founded this foundation, determined logically, not with proof, but logically, that you cannot demonstrate scientifically life after death. You cannot demonstrate things like spirits or ghosts, because any proof that you would give could equally be explained by the idea of ESP plus our own internal imagery and experiences.
So what conclusions are drawn? Does your institute take any definitive stand in relationship to the source of the phenomena? Is it naturalistic, supernaturalistic? Is it...
In that sense, we've determined that, for instance, in ESP tests, it's not so much the physical nature of the target or the physical nature of the circumstances that limits success, but it's more important the psychological nature of the circumstances. This is why, for instance, in real life, when a mother, just to pull an example out of my hat, when a mother whose son has gone away to war suddenly wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks, and has stabbing pain in her chest, then later on she finds that her son at that time was shot in the chest. Mm-hmm. That's why we look at those patterns, those interpersonal patterns, and it looks like it's for instance, the relationship of the mother to the child that's important.
Okay, but how is that information communicated? How does it get from wherever he is on the battlefield to her at home in bed?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. That's if we could answer that question, we would be quantum leaps ahead in terms of ourselves as a science.
But you don't speculate.
People speculate, but speculations are a dime a dozen.
So then what is the essential purpose for the Institute of Parapsychology? Why do you exist? For the continuing search to explain these phenomena, or what?
We know that these events exist because all through history, there have been cases and cases brought to our attention. And in the laboratory, we've been able to show that these events exist. That doesn't mean that we can explain them now, but we can certainly try to learn more about them and hope to explain them in the future.
James?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment and ask a question. I think that once people are exposed to reincarnation, their receptivity to salvation really drops because, like the man was saying, the person saw themselves a Hindu in one life, a Buddhist in the next, and a Christian martyr, etc. But whatever the law of reincarnation is, apparently it transcends the God of the Bible. Do you feel that this is basically a satanic trick to make people believe they have powers and all this and reincarnation?
Well, I think that's one explanation of it. I think that the human subconscious mind contains an incalculable record of sights and sounds of many things in our past that we've long since forgotten. Movies, TV programs, photographs, songs, literature, providing little bits and pieces from which the mind can compose an image of a person, a place, and even create the feeling that it all happened precisely in that way at some other time in the past. And, for example, as I mentioned earlier with Shirley MacLaine, in a high state of suggestibility, where the acupuncture is being applied and so on, there can be experiences that person may not consciously recall, but have been imprinted with the memory and have a striking similarity, and it all kind of congeals together in the mind, and the person says, aha, there I'm a Buddhist monk. Reverend Norman Sanders is an ordained Baptist minister, but he isn't your typical preacher. Instead of pontificating from a pulpit, Sanders gathers people in his home to be hypnotized so they can regress to former lives. Reverend Sanders became interested in reincarnational therapy while working on his doctor's degree at Texas Christian University. Then he turned his back on his evangelical upbringing for the sake of incorporating some Hinduistic beliefs in his theology, insisting that he's still a good Baptist because he believes that Jesus Christ is Lord. Sanders also believes that, I quote, God is infinite truth. Infinite. Truth is infinite. Anyone who says they have all the truth is ignorant. End of quote. Reverend Sanders, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Well, you've just offended about 3/4 of my audience out there by saying anyone who says they have all the truth is ignorant. And as I'm sure you recognize, there are a lot of people listening out there, maybe not 3/4 of them, but a good percentage of them, who believe that Jesus Christ is the complete and only embodiment of truth. So,
right, okay, I will go with that. And I was going to say, the Jesus Christ that I serve is the truth. But there are a lot of things I don't know that he would like for me to know, and therefore that makes me ignorant also.
Well, what does he want you to know that you don't know that you can't find out in his book?
Well, now, part of that answer to that question is that if I knew what I didn't know, I know what to look for, and then I would know it. But we've also got to take, we've got to look at something just a moment, and that is that not all truth is in the Bible.
Yeah, well, now, as a general broad statement of philosophical perception, I suppose that is true. But
specifically because we're using a telephone, and we're using radio, and we're using satellite, and I haven't found those in the Bible yet. Now, all truth, the Bible does not have all truth.
Is Jesus Christ all truth?
Yes. And had the people been ready, 1985 years ago or 1950 years ago, he would have been using telephone and radio, but the folks weren't ready for that.
Well, was Buddha a little splinter from the truth? Was Krishna a little splinter of the truth?
Hey, the tree out in the front of my house here is a little splinter of the truth, but it's not the whole truth.
Which truth is your tree the splinter of?
Hey, it is a part of creation, which was created by the light that God spoke into existence. And John said, this light came and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. It
seems to me you're committing the error of Romans 1 of confusing the creation and the creator.
No. I'm saying that the creator, that the Christ, that the disciples understood when they... the man that the disciples understood to be the Christ was also the creator.
Okay, now what do you do with your people? You instead of getting up on Sunday morning, what do? Put them all into a guided imagery thing and take them back to other lives?
No. We do a number of different things in our services, and sometimes if someone has a particular problem that they want to work on, then we do what we call relaxation therapy, which has nothing to do with hypnotism. In fact, the matter, it is very anti-hypnotism, because I got into this because a medical doctor had suggested that I take one of our mutual patients to a hypnotist, and I wouldn't do it.
And you wouldn't do it?
No, because hypnotism has some dangers to it that I will not fool with. I just won't have anything to do with it.
But you do believe people have lived other lives?
Well, I'll tell you, when Jesus was up on the Mount of Transfiguration, a couple of people appeared, and the disciples knew who they were. Another example was when Jesus said, hey, who do people say I am? And what was it? What the answer? The answer was, well, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you were Isaiah? No.
Well, you're close. Jeremiah or one of the prophets.
Yeah. And Isaiah, Jeremiah are one of the prophets.
Try Elijah.
Huh?
Try Elijah. But anyway.
Okay. I'm sorry.
You haven't been reading the book lately, sounds like to me, Reverend Sanders. Maybe that's your problem.
As a matter of fact, I had it written down right in front of me here.
Yeah, well, okay, but now wait a minute. The Bible very clearly states in the Gospel of Luke that he came in the spirit of Elijah. There's no suggestion that this was a transmigrational form.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that when he said to the disciples, or asked the disciples, who do men say that I am? And so they came up with some possibilities, and he didn't say anything about, obviously it wasn't John the Baptist because their lives overlapped, but he didn't question the Elijah, the Jeremiah. However, on another occasion, he mentioned that Elijah had come, and the disciples understood that to be John the Baptist.
But now, wait a minute. He also said in John 1:21, I am not he, and in Luke 1:17 it says that he came in the spirit and power, or that is the style of Elijah's ministry. That's how John the Baptist came.
That's not what the disciples understood.
Well, it's not what they understood, but that's why he clarified it. Have you lived before? What were you?
I'm sure that I have, yes, and I think that others have. And I think that the gospel of Christ is that once we accept him, he trades his perfection for our imperfection. We become spiritually perfect, and we will not be back in this life. But
well, excuse me, I just want to get this straight. You're saying you keep getting reincarnated unless you get born again, and if you get born again and receive Jesus as your Savior, then you don't have to come back.
That's what I'm saying that the gospel is.
What if you knew someone could predict the future? That tantalizing inquiry is the opening statement of a letter from the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the Edgar Cayce organization located in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Robert Clapp, Director of Membership Services, goes on in the letter to say the following, quote, Edgar Cayce made predictions which you can use. He has been called America's greatest mystic. While in a trance-like state, he could see the past and into the future. End quote. And what did Cayce prophesy? Well, according to the letter, China will become the cradle of Christianity. A city of gold will be discovered in the Gobi Desert, including a temple with elevators and electric cars. And Saskatchewan, Montana, and Argentina will feed the world. The letter is a pitch to join the Association for Research and Enlightenment and be part of their investigations into psychic research, astrology, reincarnation. Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet at one time, desired to be a missionary and claimed to have read the Bible through completely each year of his life. Eventually, he departed from orthodoxy and mixed his beliefs with strong doses of reincarnation. Cayce became concerned when he started experiencing these psychic phenomena. The famous evangelist D.L. Moody passed through town and Edgar talked with him. According to the Cayce biography, There Is a River, that's the name of the book, Moody conjectured the sleeping prophet was either possessed by evil spirits or a prognosticator according to the scriptural edict of Numbers 12:6. Did God make known unto Edgar Cayce the ways of the Lord through visions and dreams? One of his healing technique, whereby he lay in a trance, giving readings that proposed cures for the body and mind. What are we to make of his psychic revelation that Jesus was initiated into secret societies in India and Egypt? More importantly, what about his teachings in reincarnation? I would like to say a big salute to Ralph Novak, who is a book reviewer for People magazine, and in the issue of the 16th of December, he did a review of the recent Shirley MacLaine book, Dancing in the Light. And I'd like to read to you just a portion of that review. It says it a lot better than even I might say it, and I'd like you to keep in mind that this man is a secular reviewer in People magazine. This is obviously not a Christian perspective, but of Shirley MacLaine's book in Reincarnation, Dancing in the Light, Mr. Novak has this to say, quote, even giving MacLaine the benefit of every doubt, she presents an atrocious case. Through her eyes, for instance, the afterlife seems like an eternity of circling in a holding pattern over O'Hare Airport. Quote, we are souls who only temporarily reside in our bodies. We pass over to the astral dimension where we remain until we decide to reincarnate again. End quote. Reading on from the review, Mr. Novak says, she also discusses her own previous incarnations as, among other things, a Brazilian involved in voodoo, an infant flown by an eagle to Africa where she became frustrated because they were not advanced as she was, a harem dancer, a monk in a cave, a rape victim who enjoyed the experience, and someone who could control the weather. About the only person she never was, or it would seem, was Bert Parks. This could only be sad except for the condescension and cruelty that creep in. Now, keep in mind, this is a secular reviewer of Shirley MacLaine's book on reincarnation and psychic phenomena entitled Dancing in the Light. He goes on to say, MacLaine writes that through some mystical means, we are all responsible for everything that happens to us. Quote, she quotes in the book, everything, whether it was a love affair, a death, a lost job, or a disease, end quote. And then the reviewer ends with this very pithy comment. So, a child who contracts AIDS through a transfusion of infected blood is responsible for that tragedy. What inhuman stupidity. Right on, Mr. Novak. I agree with you. Reincarnation is stupidity. A book by Jess Starn entitled Edgar Cayce, the Sleeping Prophet, claims that Cayce spoke in various tongues and claimed to have once lived in Atlantis. The book Many Mansions suggests that phrases like resurrection of the dead and last judgment day were meant to be understood symbolically rather than literally, and the descriptions of hellfire are merely dramatized perceptions of spiritual truth. In Matthew 14:2 it says, this is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. There were people who believed that John the Baptist was risen from the dead. Now, this passage isn't saying that he did. This is commenting what people said about him. And his critics might have suggested that Jesus was a reincarnation of John the Baptist. But that doesn't mean the Bible was endorsing their claim. You know, a lot of people read a scripture, take it out of context, say, well, this is what the Bible says. No, it may just be commenting, in this case, on what someone else said. And even by the tenets of reincarnation, such a proposition would not have been possible, since Jesus was a grown adult when John the Baptist was beheaded. So how was that supposed to happen? It doesn't have to make sense if it's part of reincarnation. Susan's in Surrey, British Columbia.
When I was 13, I was involved in reincarnation. I got involved in it through a lady I used to babysit for. And it really mixed me up when I became a born-again Christian, because it all seemed so logical, what I had learned and read in Ruth Montgomery's books and stuff like that, that if you're good, you'll go to a good place, whichever kind of place you want to go to, and if you're bad, then you're left here to roam the earth. And when I became a Christian, I went to the church and asked the pastor, you know, what's the matter with reincarnation? Why isn't that right? And I never got really a straight answer from him, so I continued to believe in it.
Well, I think it's let me just comment, Susan. I think it's tragic that a lot of ministers really are not well versed on the issue, and maybe in eras of the past they didn't need to be. But with occultism so prevalent and these types of philosophies being taught in our countries today, I think men of God really need to become very articulate in these areas.
Oh yeah, well it was very important to me. And I tried to fit reincarnation into the scripture and say that man was only died once, but that was the physical being, and that, you know, you could come alive again as somebody else. And it just seemed so good that, you know, you could live again and make yourself better and better, and it seemed to explain these poor starving children in Africa, that they had to go through that because they'd done something bad in their lives before.
Well, what it does, it removes man's responsibility. We don't have to go over and feed those children because they're suffering because of something they already did, and they need to suffer and work out that karma.
Yeah, exactly. And I became involved in spirits, knowing if it's a good spirit or it's a bad spirit. Don't become involved with the bad spirits. And it was never mentioned anything about God or Satan.
Sure.
Just the spirits. And if you keep in touch with the good spirits and learn about auras and reading tarot cards, and the tarot cards, you couldn't throw them around because the spirit would get angry.
Oh, you had to lay them out just right.
Oh, yeah. And I was even scared to throw them out when I became born again, because I had been taught, that they'll come after you, they'll ruin your life.
What's the best advice you've got for somebody listening who's in the same trap, the same kind of bondage now that you were in then?
I'd like to say, just believe in what God says, and he says that man only dies once. I don't exactly know what scripture it is.
Hebrews 9:27.
Just have faith, and God will put you through it.
That's good advice. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I mentioned a little earlier that the Bible says in Acts 17:31 that God's appointed a day in which he shall judge the world in righteousness. And you know, when the thief was on the cross, Jesus said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, this day, today, you're going to be with me in paradise."
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn the cassette over at this point for the continuation of the message on Side 2.
Actress Shirley MacLaine sees herself in a prior life in which she lived with a herd of elephants. Another supposed past life takes place in the desert. Her latest attempt to discover her past lives has led her to try psychic acupuncture. In her book, Out on a Limb, Shirley says she's a good witch and also believes in astral projection and UFOs. My guest today, author LaGard Smith, suggests by the title of his book that Shirley MacLaine is out on a broken limb. Smith says MacLaine's book weaves an intricate tapestry of seemingly unrelated ideas and phenomena, everything from death to intimate sexual relationships, from trance mediums to psychic healers, from the paranormal to the metaphysical, from reality to illusion, from Holy Scripture to legends, from past lives to future reincarnations. Shirley MacLaine, the daughter of a psychology professor, grew up thinking God and religion were mythological. As a young girl, she attended a Baptist picnic, then opted for necking on hay rides instead. Well, today she's flirting and being taken for another ride, this time by the New Age movement, which plans to usher in an era of human enlightenment. MacLaine's claims are really outrageous. She says there's no such thing as reality. She believes UFOs provide humans with cosmic knowledge and uses a medium to channel her into the universal mind, a cosmic warehouse of collective knowledge from the beginning of time. MacLaine believes the New Age line that she is a god and that karma determines her conduct. Karma, based on reincarnation, says that each soul is working its way toward perfection by overcoming imperfections in previous lives. But MacLaine's view is contradictory. In classical Hinduism, karma is an immutable, impersonal force, with the past deciding the future. On the other hand, MacLaine says we make personal choices determining our spirit's destination. She believes the spirit evolves to a higher plane and that souls were created before the world began. Who created them? Well, she's not sure. MacLaine only knows that souls eventually found bodies in apes that later evolved into humans. Her beliefs have also some rather twisted moral implications. She suggests that karma's reincarnation explains and justifies homosexuality, adultery, incest, abortion, suicide, euthanasia, and even war. For example, a male homosexual was a female in earlier life, which explains his karmic attraction to men. Two adulterers were man and wife in other lives. Incestuous father and his victimized daughter were married in other lifetimes. Souls wanting reincarnation leave their present bodies through abortion, suicide, euthanasia, and even war. Because of this cop-out, MacLaine can say, tragedy is tragedy because we perceive it as such. In truth, there are no victims. There are only self-perception and self-realization. My guest today is author LaGard Smith. He says that Shirley MacLaine is out on a broken limb. He is a law professor at Pepperdine University. This man has obviously got all the answers you have to be a law professor, right, sir?
Oh, we lawyers think so.
From a standpoint of the legal profession, when you read a book like Shirley MacLaine's, one of the things that jump out at you that are remarkable, that would pick your interest if you had to try and defend her in a court of law, would you have a hard time doing it?
Certainly would, because the evidence just simply isn't there for a case. You'd have to build up all sorts of arguments on the strength of trying to win people over emotionally rather than trying to do it logically.
Well, if that is the case, then why in the world has she had such great success?
Because people think emotionally more than they think logically sometimes. And in fact, she plays on people who think intuitively rather than rationally, saying that depending on which side of the brain you're thinking out of, you're going to be thinking intuitively rather than logically. That we've had a male society that thinks rationally. Now we need a female society that thinks intuitively.
She says we decide to have tragedies, that tragedies aren't really tragedies. They are the result of our perception. Are we back to the old Maya theory in Hinduism, the idea that Christian scientists borrowed and so on, that matter is not real? What is she trying to say? Nothing is reality?
Well, part of her inconsistency is, on one hand, she dances and acts in a very real world, a very materialistic world. But on the other hand, her belief systems are such that she says this entire universe and our entire lifetime may just be one gigantic thought, that it is not real, that it is imagined, that we really are spirit beings from another plane. We deceive ourselves being on this plane. Therefore, when we think in terms of tragedy, it is not really tragedy.
Why did a law professor get interested in writing this book?
I got interested more because of my work with the Bible. Some years ago, having written the Narrated Bible, chronological arrangement of the New International Version, it intrigued me that much of what Shirley MacLaine was writing was based upon, theoretically, the Bible and what Jesus had said. And I knew that wasn't right, of course.
There are many people out there listening right now who are very much into these types of things. We have a lot of New Agers and individuals of reincarnations and so on in our listening audience, and they consider themselves to be logical, intelligent people. Are you saying they are not rational?
I'm saying that when they take positions that are inherently inconsistent, then that part of their logic that they normally use is not being used at that time.
Then why is NBC going to do a 5-hour mini-series, kind of a docudrama on her book this fall? They obviously believe there's a market for this thing out there.
Well, obviously, Bob, when did television ever try to be logical? They just want a market out there.
It never did. Why do you think Shirley MacLaine wrote the book?
I think she wrote Out on a Limb as a personal memoir of her spiritual odyssey. I think she may have written Dancing in the Light, her most recent book, simply for commercial purposes. She's a different person in those two books.
Well, the latter one, she seems to be even more evangelistic in her attitudes toward trans-channeling and some of the spiritualistic aspects. Do you think she's just really given over to that sort of thing? Is she being compelled by spiritual forces, or is it her own kind of evangelism program?
I can't tell for sure on the spiritual forces. It's certainly a possibility, but she's clearly further out on a limb and certainly out on a broken limb.
The thing we're dealing with here was somebody who comes from a kind of fundamental religious background, encounters legalism, gets turned off by Christianity. How many people are into this whole kind of Shirley MacLaine philosophy who are spiritual pilgrims having at one time a kind of evangelical faith?
Well, the Gallup poll today says 1 out of 4 people believe in reincarnation in our country. And these are people who have come out of mainline evangelical, fundamentalist churches, many of whom have been, unfortunately, turned off by rather materialistic churches that have not met spiritual needs, and they've been ripe for Eastern mysticism. At least there's a greater appearance of something that seems spiritual, but most of them, to be frank with you, Bob, are following Charlie's lead. Charlie says, I don't want to face judgment. And what better way not to face judgment than to say that everybody's going to come back in enough lifetimes to get it right. Even Hitler, Idi Amin, Colonel Gaddafi, everyone's going to win. What a great philosophy of life.
You say heart and soul of the New Age movement, which Mrs. MacLaine embraces, is self-deification. But she also looks to some external sources for truth. What is she after here? Is this part of this contradiction again? She's looking out there, and yet looking in here. She's looking to verification from spirit entities, and yet she's looking to the intuitive answers of her own spirit. What's going on?
Well, what's going on is everybody in society these days seems to be, quote, looking for themselves, as if they can't see themselves in a mirror each morning. Looking for themselves, then they are told by Eastern mysticism and sort of westernized, Christianized forms of reincarnation that truth is within you. Edgar Cayce says the universe is within you. Just look within yourself. If you want answers, look within yourself. And then they're told, you are God, because everything is God. The trees are God, the sky is God, the chair is God, you are God, Bob is God, LaGard is God. Therefore, look within yourself. And yet, you have to pay $400 a pop to go out to a psychic to tell you what you need to know. You have to read a vast library of books on psychic phenomena to know what you need to know. The inconsistency of looking within yourself on one hand and deifying yourself, which is your own emptiness, worshiping your own emptiness is the ultimate folly, and then having to go out and pay a bunch of bucks to all the ascended masters, all of whom, of course, accept every major credit card.
Okay. Susie, Hanford, California.
Hi, Bob. I used to be a witch, and I was into everything that Shirley MacLaine was into, I guess. I heard her on a talk show, and did she mention witchcraft in that? I never did hear her say that, if she said she was a witch or not.
Yeah, she has claimed to be that at one time, hasn't she?
Well, on talk programs, she laughingly says she's a good witch.
Okay, well, that basically that's what I was into, and that's what she's doing. I don't know if she's I've never read the books, but like I said, I saw her on a talk show, and everything she said I was into. And the spooky, funny thing is, everything she's saying are things that she didn't necessarily get from another book or whatever. It's like, you know these things, and that's why for years I thought it had to be true, because I knew it, I felt it, and I contacted somebody else who was into it, and they said the same things. And it's like, when you mention these spirit entities, I wonder if maybe she is getting some messages somewhere, because now I'm a Christian, and I know how real that stuff is.
Well, she does have channeling sessions, and she consults spirit mediums. What role does spiritualism play in the overall viewpoint of MacLaine?
Let's take two different tacks on it. One tack is that she's going to psychics and mediums like Kevin Ryerson, whom she names in her book, Psychic from San Francisco. He's a guy who is a cut above your normal palm reader. He's bright, intelligent, articulate, friendly, warm, humorous, all the other kinds of things you could think about. And he's sitting in a living room with people who've driven up in BMWs and Mercedes-Benz and upper middle class people who have lots of bucks. And they're sitting in this room listening to him, supposedly in a trance, supposedly channeling or using his body as an instrument through which entities from the astral plane, that plane somewhere apart from the earth plane, are supposedly coming through him and giving us all sorts of information on diet and religion and health and so forth.
Now, you excuse me, but you've contacted this man yourself, Kevin Ryerson.
Well, Bob, I don't like to use the word contact. That's as if it's something kind of weird and strange. But I have been to both one of his sessions dealing with intuition, and then I had a personal private channeling session with him about 4 months later.
You better explain what you're talking about when you say a channeling session, because some people don't have any idea what's going on.
You go in and you pay big bucks to have Kevin sit back in a chair, half asleep, and he asks you some questions about what you want to know. He says, "Here, let me help you out as to what questions you might want to ask the entities as they come through." And you're always a little bit suspicious as to what he's at that point. But when you're talking to Kevin, that way he gets a preview of the questions you're going to ask him, obviously. Then you get the entities coming through. He's got a couple of them. One's named John. John speaks in sort of an Elizabethan English, sort of the these and thous of the King James Version. Then he's got Tom McPherson, who supposedly is an Irish chap, but listen, I've been to Ireland many times, and I've never heard anybody that sounds like that.
So
it's clearly Kevin's voice.
Okay, so in either of these instances, did we have a case of spirit possession?
I don't
think they're
so.
both fakery?
I think they're both fakery.
Okay.
And you get this kind of a feeling. When we were in the session on intuition, he was asking everyone who was there, tell me a dream, and I'll give you the interpretation, or at least the entities will tell you the interpretation. Well, we know how that goes. If you go back in the scriptures, you can find anybody who can give the interpretation, but who can give you the dream? And I asked Kevin, or at least the entities that were supposed to be being channeled through him, I said, well, why do you have all this great omniscient knowledge from the astral plane, and you have to ask us what the dream is? And the answer was, well, you fatigue the instrument, meaning Kevin. He gets tired out trying to do it, but he could do it.
Yeah.
Because he didn't do it that night, and he couldn't do it. But once you get into this stuff, I told him a dream that I'd had, incidentally, about Shirley MacLaine. It was an actual dream. Spending as much time as I had spent reading her books and responding to it and so forth, it must have been weighing heavily on my mind one night. I had a dream. Mm-hmm. So I gave it to him. And at the intuition seminar, I got one interpretation of the dream. 4 months later in the private channeling session, got an altogether different interpretation of the same dream. But when push comes to shove, by sort of leading him into it, interesting thing, Bob, LaGard Smith and Shirley MacLaine have shared a prior life together.
Together?
Together. 11th century China.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was a Taoist scholar. She was a shadow puppeteer. And to get across the teaching of Taoism, we teamed up and used her skills as a shadow puppeteer and spread Taoism all through China.
Why don't we ever hear about anybody having lived a previous life in 16th century Europe, being a dung collector following horses down the streets of London? We never hear about that.
Well, would you pay $400 to hear somebody tell you that?
There's so much that we could get into. It just seems like there's a potpourri of spiritualism out there, and we go to reach out for it, and you grab at this piece and that piece and that piece and that piece. How does the individual who's into this sort of thing decide? Does he just kind of bounce around like a billiard ball? It's reincarnation one week, deja vu the next, and he's into UFOs the next week. Where do people finally settle down into? Is it the astral teachings or whatever? Because it seems so eclectic. It just seems like they just go from one thing to another.
Well, I have sometimes described it as sort of the blob. You get a handle on part of it, and then the next thing you know, it's coming back at you from another direction. But I think most of the people that are into this probably disagree with Shirley MacLaine with regard to UFOs and extraterrestrials and so forth. What they basically agree with her on is the concept of reincarnation. And the reason for that is, as we talked earlier, it escapes condemnation, escapes judgment. You can do basically whatever you want. There are no standards to have to follow, really. You can live a pretty good life, and you can have the hope that you can come back in another life. And people who are paying big bucks to find out about past lives, it's entertainment. It's entertainment. People have big bucks for mind lifts.
You know, we talk about individuals having been this or that in the 11th century in China, talking about satellites from the sky beaming mind waves down. In this entire discussion, you don't hear, and we haven't heard words like love and compassion and forgiveness and grace and mercy. that seems to be taboo.
Well, it has been taboo because the law of karma is an absolute law that says what you do, you will have to pay for. But the sad irony is that the westernized, Christianized form of reincarnation is now trying to introduce a concept of grace. They don't explain it well. They don't tell us how it came about. They don't tell us how it can possibly be consistent with the law of karma. But it's starting to be introduced because they know, I think intuitively, that at the heart and soul of Christianity, what Christianity has over every other religious system is love and grace. Mm-hmm. Everybody talks about love, mm-hmm. love your brother, and etc. But when you talk in terms of a loving, personal God that cares about you, we're not talking about a belief system. We're talking about Jesus Christ.
Shirley MacLaine's book, Out on a Limb, is filled with talk of psychic mediums, déjà vu, UFOs, and esoteric interpretations of the Bible. It's common for New Agers like her to find occultic support for their beliefs. Through a psychic medium named Kevin, MacLaine says she communicates with spirit entities. She also claims occultic support for her belief in déjà vu, the sensation of familiarity with the past, and says it's proof of prior existence. She frequently refers to astral projection. Many people claim to have had these so-called out-of-the-body experiences. MacLaine says they're proof of reincarnation. In a so-called conversation with a spiritual entity called John, MacLaine was told that the Bible refers to UFOs. For example, the pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night that guided the Exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt was actually, guess what? That's right, a UFO. Ezekiel's vision of the spinning wheels, the wheel within a wheel, is another example of extraterrestrial visitation. Like all New Agers, MacLaine discredits Christ by making him merely one of many avatars, incarnations of deity. Jesus was better than Krishna. In fact, Christ was able to perform miracles because he traveled to India and became a yogi. You quote Ms. MacLaine as saying, souls were created before the world began, and then souls lodged in evolved primates and later became Homo sapiens. She really has an interesting viewpoint here of the inanimate and the animate, of the human and the non-human, that's unique in terms of reincarnation. Does she really define where she's coming from? What is her scope of all that is created, living and non-living?
Well, she's just drawing from all the other sources that have been around for a long time, including Edgar Cayce, all of whom say that at some period in time, at the beginning, whenever the beginning was, that the God consciousness, which is this giant mass of soup out in the cosmic space, decided to individualize into various points of consciousness, and that became individual spirit, each one of those points of consciousness. And then at some point in time, these spirits came down into the earth plane, the three-dimensional earth plane. No one explains how that came about or anything else, but it came down to the earth plane, and they started believing that they were no longer spirit beings, but physical beings, human bodies.
Excuse me, but it seems to me that the people who get into this sort of thing have all types of esoteric ideas, but they never really have to objectively nail the thing down. They just kind of float around in little bits and pieces here and there, and people smile at them on talk shows and say, isn't that cute?
Well, of course, they could lay the same claim against Christians, that we're talking about spiritual things, spiritual dimensions. We have Lord and Savior Jesus Christ who perform supernatural feats and so forth. People have to be pretty critical about both sides. Both Christians and non-Christians have to look at the spirit world very carefully. It's not so easy to say mine is objective and theirs is not. Because the spirit world truly is not an objective kind of thing. You can prove some things by facts, other things you have to accept on faith. The problem that we're trying to challenge people through the book and so forth is to find out what kind of faith is founded on rationalism that will give you some assurance that what you ultimately believe by faith has some grounding in truth.
Logan in Memphis, Tennessee. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Lawson.
Yes.
I am Logan.
You are Logan.
Crowned Master Logan of the Dragon Council.
Crowned Master Logan of the
Grandmaster.
Grandmaster of the Dragon Council. What is this, a division of the Ku Klux Klan?
No, not quite.
What is it?
Our methods work better.
Your methods. What are you?
I am. We exist to decide, and we question your beliefs.
Yeah, well, what are you, though? Are you a channeled entity? Are you just, are you a Presbyterian? I mean, what are you?
We believe in the dragon.
What dragon?
The 9 dragons.
The devil?
No, not the devil.
Where'd you get this accent?
I have an accent because I have an accent. There's no need to worry about the accent.
How old are you?
18.
18? You got an accent like that?
It's a gift.
It's affected. Is it affected, or is somebody else influencing you with that accent?
The dragon has many gifts. That is part of it.
Is this the dragon talking to me now?
No.
No. Who's talking to me?
Logan.
Yeah, I know Logan's talking to me, but what's this voice?
This voice is Logan.
Yeah. You've got these weird tales about the dragons, but what is the whole point of your call?
My point is to discuss our differences in religion.
Yeah, okay. Well, what does this have to do with the topic today, specifically?
The topic is spiritualism, about concerning reincarnation,
yes,
karma,
yeah,
and deja vu.
Okay, what do you want to say?
Well, concerning reincarnation, the dragon cult is very much founded upon that.
Yeah.
I don't say a thing about cults. I know your attitude towards them.
Uh-huh.
Well, we do not die as others die. When we die, we return. Reincarnation.
To what?
We return in another form, another world usually.
In another world. As a human?
Depends upon the planet.
As an extraterrestrial. Where do you get this idea from?
The dragon tells me.
The dragon.
Very close.
And how do you talk to the dragon?
The dragon is very old and wise. He speaks to me as Jesus spoke to his father.
No, how does he speak to you? Do you hear an audible voice, or is this...
I've met him.
You what?
I've met him.
You met him. Did you conjure him up, or what?
I don't conjure. I merely walked into his temple and met him.
Where's his temple?
That's a very great secret among dragon temples.
Yeah, is this somewhere near Memphis?
Nowhere near Memphis.
It's not Graceland, is it?
No, it's not Elvis. It's a bit more exotic than Memphis.
Yeah.
More Graceland.
Okay, and the whole point of this is what, Logan? Because I have a feeling this is going nowhere.
Well, that's your feeling, not mine.
Well, we've had people fasting and praying today, and I suggest we get them fasting and praying for you.
Let's discuss this. They're fasting and praying for no reason.
No, hang on. We're getting off the subject now, Logan. I want to know, your premise of reincarnation is that you kind of come back somewhere, somehow. Where do you come back?
I come back upon the world the dragon chooses.
Uh-huh. And you don't know what that is until you die?
Well, dying is not what you call it.
Okay.
Well, it's transcending, I believe.
All right. I want my guest to comment on this. Logan, I'm glad to know that you're listening. I think you're a little wacko, and I don't know what you've been smoking, but if you're real serious about this...
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, okay. Well, I want you to know I am concerned about you, and I hope you'll keep listening to the show.
Perhaps the concerns of what affects your eye.
What? You said what?
Perhaps the concerns of what affects your eye.
Yeah, okay. Logan, greater is he that is in us than he that is in you. I just want you to know that.
That's false prophecy again.
Yeah, well, I don't know about being a false prophecy or not, but this guy is very typical of those who get into reincarnation. They like to have it all kinds of ways, don't they, as to what they never really know what they're going to come back. It seems to me a very imprecise way of looking at one's spiritual future. Christianity gives us some certainty.
Yeah, Bob, I'm not worried about Logan except in a very personal way. I'm worried about the thousands of people, the millions of people who would come across sounding very normal on a program like this, who are architects and lawyers and doctors, school teachers, who are trading in a traditional belief in Jesus Christ and His love and grace and mercy and a promise of heaven in an afterlife for sort of a whimsical hope based on paranormal experiences, sort of a Ripley's Believe It or Not founded belief in astral plane entities and so forth that is not going to bring them either spiritual satisfaction in the world to come or real true inner peace in this world. That's who I'm worried about. I'm concerned about Logan, but I think he may be playing games with us.
Yeah, and the real problem is not a kid like this who gets off into something weird and thinks he's talking with a dragon who's a great wise master, but the yuppieization of what's happening with the whole New Age philosophy today. As you said, it's your next-door neighbor. It's the guy on the job who looks as normal as anybody else, not going to secret temple somewhere, but who's buying into this stuff. That's what's really dangerous. How fundamentally is it altering our societal viewpoint of reality?
Well, I'll tell you what's happening. The whole New Age movement, of which Shirley MacLaine's reincarnation philosophy is such a central part, ultimate reality is being changed from a personal loving God to undifferentiated energy and consciousness or life force, which is ill-defined and cannot help us in a personal way. Humanity, which has been seen traditionally as an extension of God, is being turned into humanity being God. We are God. And humanity's predicament is not moral sin, but it's metaphysical ignorance. And, you know, what's happening is that all of our standards in society are changing as a result of this kind of fundamental belief. I tell you that the law of karma is right to this extent. What you believe does have an effect on society's ethics.
John in Bakersfield, what are you?
I am, what am I?
What teachings do you follow?
I'm a searcher for truth.
Searcher for truth.
But I would not relate or call myself a Christian, at least not a modern-day Christian.
You're not a Christian?
Not according to...
You believe in reincarnation?
Yes, I do.
Where do you get those teachings from?
Well, from readings of Edgar Cayce.
Uh-huh.
I read it. I wasn't very much into believing anything like that at all until I read some of his work.
What did you do? Get a book like There Is a River, Many Mansions, or something like that? And it just...
I've read them all, as it turns out. The first one I read was one that had to do with karma and reincarnation. Both.
Yeah. What do you think about him, for example, condoning the smoking of cigarettes, saying it's harmless, and also saying there's no problem with homosexuality? He kind of follows a little bit of Shirley MacLaine's idea that it has to do with reincarnation. Would you accept that?
Yeah, I do. As far as smoking goes, I don't see the relevance of that too much. Smoking to some, like drinking.
Okay, what about homosexuality? What about his...
I think homosexuals are in a transitional state, spiritually speaking.
Yeah, would you feel the same thing if one of them molested your son?
I do believe that anyone that is a transgressor toward another human being is equally guilty, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual.
Yeah, LaGard, it seems to me there's an interesting ethical viewpoint we have here, that people are not responsible for their moral conduct. They're just in this transitional state of transmigration.
Well, Edgar Cayce doesn't even put it in that way. Edgar Cayce says that there's boomerang karma. One of the life readings that Edgar Cayce gave had a person in a former life supposedly being a gossip monger in a French royal court. And he particularly liked to gossip against homosexuals, so in this life he came back himself as a homosexual. Right. So if you criticize something, that's what you're going to come back as, which a lot of the callers on this program might be interested in that. If they start criticizing Christianity in this life, boomerang karma may bring them back as a Christian in the next life.
Or a Christian talk show host in the next life. They don't want this job.
No, I don't think karma works that bad.
It doesn't work that bad.
What he said is can be true. It's true at times, I'm sure. For a person to be born with one handicap or another, depending on what you consider a handicap.
I don't consider homosexuality a handicap. I consider it a perversion. Handicap? Give me a break.
Sure you would. You'd consider that a perversion. You'd consider a lot of things my wife and I do in bed alone in our privacy of our bedroom a perversion.
How do you know?
But of course...
How do you know? How do you know I do? Now wait, how do you know?
How do I know?
I don't want to know what you do in your bedroom, but how do you know I think it's perverted?
You
can't make assumptions about my sexual ethic.
An assumption on that, but I would put money on it if I were a betting man.
Yeah, okay.
I'm pretty
Well,
sure.
the Supreme Court said you can't practice sodomy, so then you'll have to talk to them. John?
No, they'll have to talk to me. That's a blue law if you ever seen one.
John?
Yes.
Do you see the inconsistency of the viewpoint that my guest has pointed out over and over again today? Do you see that? You jettison the Bible, you throw it out, you listen to what an attorney, a law professor has to say, and you take the word of some guy who lay down on a couch, went into trances, and gave out these...
performed very, very well the things he said for different people to do to help them with whatever their particular physical problem was.
Yeah, well, Jesus rose from the dead, and there's an empty tomb to prove it. I think he's a lot more credible than Edgar Cayce. This is one of the interesting things to me. The whole theory of transmigration has been watered down in the West. In India, where you can't come back as a cockroach. Better yet, you can come back as a monkey or a rat. The Americans, they wanted to pick and choose their kind of
Absolutely, they want their cake and eat it too. It's called cosmic cake in this case. We do not devolve according to the westernized, Christianized form of reincarnationist. We always come back as somebody pretty wonderful, pretty special. People are just playing games in terms of karma because no one is being told by the psychics and mediums what their bad karma is. When I asked Kevin Ryerson, Shirley MacLaine's psychic, what my bad karma was, what I was working out, he said, basically, you don't have any bad karma. Well, then the next question is, why am I still here? Because you can share the truth of what you know with other people. And I'm glad he said that because I do want to share the truth of what I know about Jesus Christ with other people. But you notice in Shirley MacLaine's writings, and you notice most of the people who are claiming to believe in reincarnation and karma, they are not true seekers of what their karma is. Mm-hmm. They don't know. They don't want to know what their bad karma is. No one's out there working on their bad karma. In California, where all the fruits, flakes, and nuts are out there who are believing in reincarnation, only thing they're working on is their tan. They're not working on bad karma.
I like this guy's sense of humor.
People are worried about suffering and trying to show reincarnation and the law of karma as being such a superior system to traditional Christianity. When did the law of karma ever come into this world in the form of a person to share in the suffering that we share in? Mm-hmm. Jesus Christ was a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. He was tortured by his friends, agonized over people who had betrayed him. He was put to death on a cross. kinds of suffering that most of us have not even experienced. And this was the Son of God in the flesh coming down to us to learn what true suffering was all about. And he cares about us. The law of karma couldn't care less.
This isn't a drill. This isn't a test. Your soul's at stake.
This is the end of the message. For further information regarding other topics available on cassette and in printed form, write Bob Larson Ministries, Box 36A, Denver, Colorado, 80236.